cannot overstate that the number one make or break factor is your advisor. The stage where you are interviewing and then deciding which program to go to, you need to be very discerning about the advisor. There are seriously horror stories. Heard about advisors who have kept their students in grad school 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years unnecessarily to get free labor out of them without letting them defend. I had a friend who had someone on his committee. Luckily, it was not his advisor, but it was someone who just absolutely hated him for no reason. This person also had her husband working as a postdoc. There was a situation where it was found out that a tenured professor was not only fabricating data, but also having his students fabricate data. And it's not always necessarily that the professor is outwardly malevolent. Sometimes it's just that you guys are not compatible. Say you are someone who needs a lot of hand-holding. Not an insult, by the way, just a different type of learner. You have a lot of questions, you have a lot of anxiety, you like to get feedback. You do not want the PI who is super famous, tenured, always traveling, never responds to emails. Say you're someone who feels stifled by micromanagement, like to work independently. You don't want to then work with the PI who likes to check in a lot, likes to hear updates a lot, likes to maybe guide your research direction or pick your project for you. That advisor would probably go well with the first student, whereas you would probably go well with the first advisor. But wait, because it's not actually the PI that you'll be interacting with the most, it is the other grad students. So what you also need to know is about the culture of the lab. Is it more collaborative or is it more competitive? As a rule of thumb, though this is not always true, the more competitive the school, it tends to get a little more competitive. In some cases, toxic. Competitive does not always mean toxic, but it's sort of more likely. There are horror stories for that too. My PhD advisor had someone pour ethanol in someone else's samples while she was in grad school. I don't thrive in that sort of atmosphere. I mean, I could perform in it fine if I wanted to, but I just don't find it fulfilling. Some people actually work really well under that kind of pressure. You need to know what kind of lab it is, and that's something you should be able to tell during the interview. Returning to the question of the PI, something that may correlate to how present versus absent may tend to be, but it doesn't necessarily in every case correlate exactly. Early versus late stage professors. So late stage professors will tend to have more funding, which I'm going to talk about in a second, but they may not be as present as early stage professors. I did my PhD with the early stage professor. Actually, I was her first graduate student. I want to be a professor, so that was very useful for me to watch her set up the lab and help her do it. But there were definitely trade-offs. We didn't have the preliminary data. It may have made me more competitive for things like an F31. She was very upfront, by the way, about that when I started. It's just something to consider, but I had a phenomenal PhD experience. I would do it all over again, the same advisor. The final point I want to make is please, 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 please ask about funding and know whether the position is funded. Okay, are you going to be scrambling for funding and potentially not even be able to defend if your professor can't get that funding? Are you for sure working on a project that is sponsored by an NIH grant, like an R01 or something? Is your professor using startup funds? A lot of students, I feel like, are so scared to ask these questions, but you really need to know, because the last thing you want is to have to drop out because there's just no more funding for you, or to be rushed at the end of your PhD when you're trying to make a good dissertation, but you have to get out of the door before your funding runs out. Those are both awful situations. Honestly, my number one advice to you as prospective grad students is to remember that they are not just interviewing you. You are interviewing them. Oh, and one more thing to discuss. I'm sorry, I know I keep going last thing, but it's important to know whether you are going directly into a professor's lab because they've expressed that they will definitely be taking you in their lab, or whether there's some sort of rotation and match mechanism in the program. Some programs, I think they make you match even if you already decided that with the professor. Regardless, you should always know if they do have a match, trial, whatever rotation mechanism, you need to know how long that part of the PhD will be. You also should know what classes you're required to take and what sort of GPA you have to maintain. And also there's slight differences in how the prelims and the quals work in different programs. Just make sure you know all of that information so nothing comes as a surprise. Also know what happens if you fail. Most places, they just give you a master's and tell you bye. That's something you would want to know. Not that I think you guys would ever fail my lovely, lovely, lovely Pookies. Also, if you didn't get into the program you wanted, or even to any PhD programs at all, it is not the end of the world, I promise, even though I know it feels like it. And if you did, congratulations, good luck, and on behalf of me and all the other biomedical PhDs, we cannot wait to have you in our ranks. Bye.